Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we're releasing a special episode from a project that I undertook in 2022 that I called the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. It was my intention to take all of the best clips about one particular topic and put them together as a masterclass to be released behind a paywall with a subscription-based service on Patreon. Well, we didn't have too many subscribers, so I am breaking these episodes up and releasing them here for free so that they can make an impact and hopefully help some people out there. Today's episode was taken from the second series, all about ketosis and the ketogenic diet. This is part 2 from the third and final episode, all about everyday people discovering ketogenic diets and improving their health because they change their diets. We always appreciate any feedback that you might have, so feel free to leave us a comment on YouTube or on our website at myboundlessbody.com, where you can always book a complimentary 30-minute session with us at any time. Cheers and enjoy part 2 of this 2-part conversation, all about the ketogenic diet impacting the lives of everyday people. We are going to go to Chris Cornell, a really inspiring guy who has a very familiar story as well. He's another person who isn't exactly a household name, but he's doing really great work. We interviewed him on episode 325 of Boundless Body Radio. I thought he had a great story. I thought he had great tips. So let's listen to Chris Cornell and hear his story.
For decades, I struggled on and off with weight gain and weight loss, and it was just revolutionized my life when I learned how to control my weight, and that's led to a whole domino sequence of events that have helped me in other areas as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do most people just think you found a time travel machine and just like went backwards, reverse aging?
I don't know. It's interesting. Having found low carb and having found a way to improve my health and my appearance and my quality of life, I've also come in contact with a lot of other people who have experienced some of the same benefits. So hanging out in this group of people, I'm not such an anomaly, actually. I know in the general population, it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it definitely is not. You look at some of the people that are in our world and like the Mark Sissons and the Brad Kearns and the Sean Bakers, all these people, who are aging, but looking like they're getting younger and younger and younger as the years go on. It's really quite remarkable, especially when you compare it to what you mentioned, the general population. That delta just keeps getting wider and wider and wider. And it's really apparent when you go out and go to the mall or the airport, like we're not doing great.
No, we are not, and the some of what I see going on in the mainstream nutrition and medical fields with respect to the attitudes towards obesity and metabolic disease is kind of disturbing. I think that the average person could, do a lot more for their health just with lifestyle changes. And I know there's other issues and there's other solutions that can be a part of that, but I definitely don't think that it's appropriate to have people filled with the idea that they are completely helpless and cannot, make changes that will improve their life. And that goes for just about every area of your life. There's things you can do to take control and improve your situation.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And on that note, don't you believe that it would be easier than most people think? Not that it's going to be super easy, but if people realized the simple things that they could do, that it wouldn't be as big of a pain or the reward would be far greater than what people think it might be?
Yes, there's no doubt about that. Using the wrong information, some things are literally impossible to solve. And I was always the kind of person that tried to figure things out on my own. And, that worked for certain things. I learned how to replace pipes in my kitchen. I learned how to do some minor electrical work. But I also, when I didn't know how to do something, I would typically, just for my own safety, ask someone for some help and some guidance to try to avoid the problems. With weight loss, I was literally just following the wrong information. It's like I restrict calories and exercise more. Sounds great. And there's some small bits of truth to that. But without additional knowledge, a lot of people just find themselves on a endless cycle of losing weight and gaining weight. And And then when I finally one day in January of 2018 reached out to a friend who I knew had some knowledge, and I asked for a recommendation for a book, and he came back with Tobbs's Why We Get Fat. That single book was the catalyst that got me going on this journey and led me to a whole bunch of other things. But the change was almost instantaneous. It happened. I was in the waiting area of a Mexican restaurant on my daughter's 16th birthday, and I was reading on a Kindle that book by Tobbs, and all of a sudden, a light went off or on, and I just said, "Wait a second, I think I understand this," and I changed what I ordered at dinner that night, and I literally never looked back.
Wow.
I lost weight consistently, with really almost no exceptions. I've had no relapses. I've had a couple of bad days, but it's been unbelievable. So I'm down 80 pounds. It's now I'm just about at 4 years of being at my goal weight, at or below 205 pounds. And I've probably added a bunch of muscle from when I first got to that goal weight. Since then, my body fat has continued to go down, even though my weight has not. So I'm doing better on just about every count.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so obvious to see when you see the pictures and what you're doing. You're running a lot, you're doing a lot of weightlifting, but when you look at your physical appearance, like it's totally apparent that you have completely recompositioned your body. And it's amazing that we can do that at really any age. It requires the right information. When we're talking about your story, let's back up a bit and talk about your journey into unhealth. Tell us, some of the things that you noticed, not only the weight gain, but also other things that kind of went along with that, and what things you tried along the way before you got that great book recommendation.
I went up and down in weight quite a bit ever since, even towards the end of my last couple of years of college. I was gaining a few pounds. I was not obese by any stretch. I was very active, but I was slowly gaining weight. I really never was at what they call a healthy weight. But after I got out of college, I had a lot of work, a lot of jobs that required sitting at a desk for long hours. And, within 2 years of being out of college, I got up to like a 40-inch waist size. And, my weight was creeping up over 230. And, it's hard to remember exactly the sequence, but over the years, I would lose 10 pounds and gain 15 pounds. And before long, I was up over 250, and then in my late 40s, it just kept climbing. And then there was a long time when I never stepped on a scale, so I didn't really realize how heavy I'd gotten. And it was one day when I was 51, I stepped on a scale at my mother's house, and I saw 278 pounds. And I think it's sort of a vicious circle. You gain the weight, you become less likely to enjoy doing some of the things, the move more type of things, like hiking up a mountain or going for a run, becomes less enjoyable. So you spend more time sitting around, and certainly the diet wasn't helping me. I was eating a lot of refined carbs and other foods that are not good for your metabolism. And I was always stopping at convenience stores and just eating foods that were not helpful to me. And so even when I first got to that 278 pounds and realized I had to do something, I didn't know what to do. I cut out sugary drinks, and I lost like 15 pounds, but it was still a up and down thing until I found that book. And let's see, the reaching out and asking someone for help was important for a couple of reasons, because it was sort of like it wasn't a completely public thing, but it was reaching out to someone else who, once I asked for his recommendation, I sort of felt like I had to remain accountable to at least read the book that he recommended for me. And just that alone, reading a book and giving it an honest, look into what was being talked about. There must be a reason why this guy recommended the book. he chose one book out of many for me. And that one principle alone is something I've gone back to many times since. Like if I want to learn something about running, and I have access to somebody that knows a lot about running, I'll say, hey, like Zach Bitter, the former 100-mile world record holder in the 100-mile run, I had a couple of opportunities to talk to him, ask for book recommendation, ask for article recommendations. Same thing with other people like Brady Homer, who has been giving me some coaching along the way for my now half marathon training. These people know infinitely more than I'll ever know about running. Why not tap into their knowledge when you have a chance to ask for some help and, get from somebody else, get some idea as to where you should focus your energies. And I do that in all areas of my life now. And it's been very helpful.
It's such a great lesson to learn. Why do you think more of us don't do that? Why do we think we have all the answers, or we just trust the mainstream versus seeking out and finding and hiring the experts in the field and compensating them fairly for that information? I feel like most of us would rather, buy the sexy meal plan or, buy the sexy workout equipment that's the newest thing on the block versus hiring a coach who knows what they've been doing and they've been in the field for, 20, 30 years.
Well, that's a great question. And for one, I think there is one answer to the reason why people don't do that is because they don't know who to ask. It requires some discernment. There are good coaches out there who are well worth every penny that you spend with them. And there's coaches out there that are not good. And if you make the wrong decision, people are afraid to make the wrong decision. You don't necessarily want to just reach out to a sort of somebody that you don't have 100% confidence in and just put your whole life in their hands. So you've got to balance that. And, finding a good coach would be life-changing for a lot of people. It's just, how do you do that? And what I've learned through Twitter that by getting involved in a community, you ask some questions, you look at the answers, you try to gauge. You can't tell whether someone's for real just by asking them one question. But if you follow their answers and you read into them and you check them and you verify, you can start to get an idea as to who is talking sense and who is not. There's another thing that some people are right about a lot of things and they're wrong about something. You've got to always keep yourself open to that. And then, it's just, yeah, I think that's really it. You've got to find the right people to go to. You've got to make a lot of decisions on your own, and you got to learn to trust some of your instincts. But then you've got to, when you find someone that you trust, you can start to put more of your outcome in their hands. Once you feel like they're going to give you good advice, you can really start using that advice to your benefit.
Yeah, you made so many really good points there. And I just want to point out, like Twitter specifically, somebody in my neighborhood just put out a tweet. It was about a week ago. It was something about like cardio. Should I be doing cardio? And all of these like answers came through with all these people that had very specific things and why it was great. None of them asked any questions like good for what? What are your goals? What are you training for? It was like definitive, like here's what you have to do. And so to me, that's a great barometer to look at those people and say like, well, you guys are probably not the people I want to be hiring as a coach versus somebody like you mentioned, Zach Bitter. We just hosted Zach Bitter for the second time. We did an episode all about nutrition for endurance athletes. And the number of times that he said, I don't know, it depends. There's so much nuance to it. Zach Bitter is an amazing coach, an amazing human, because he considers all of those things before saying like, yeah, go zero carb and this is your running program. And like, there's so much nuance. And I think that's a really great way to find those good coaches because it can get very confusing out there.
Again, more excellent points. It's, I had the opportunity to speak to Zach and ask him questions. And he, if you ask some people about can you run effectively and efficiently with a low carb diet, their first answer will be no. And then you look at somebody like Zach and you're like, well, all right, even if a low carb diet isn't optimal for every form of exercise, here's a guy that is setting world records um, he's running his 100th mile of a 100-mile race faster than I can run 1 mile. Faster than I could probably run a half a mile. I could meet up with Zach at the 99.5 mile mark, and I wouldn't be able to keep up with him to the finish if I was fresh. So the guy must know a couple of things. It's mind blowing that some people are so absolute and lack nuance.
Yeah, totally. In that episode that we did with him, we talked about somebody who's in the endurance world more on the female side of things. And she would just come right out and say, you cannot do endurance sports on low carbohydrate, and women cannot do intermittent fasting. And it's like, well, you're just closing the door. There's no discussion there. If you say that can't be done, I have clients that are doing it. So first of all, it can be done. And some people might prefer that. And Zach had just a wonderful way of working around that and saying like, okay, if you choose to do this, here are some things to be mindful of. And yeah, I just think that's a really great way to find the good people who are really going to help you along the way. So Chris mentioned Zach Bitter, who we have actually interviewed 2 times, but we're going to take a clip from Zach Bitter's first interview on Boundless Body Radio back on episode 87, so we can learn from him and learn how an endurance athlete also found low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets.
Yeah, it was kind of maybe I just was fortunate that I had a couple things happen in parallel. And one was I started listening to podcasts while I was running. I think when I first started kind of training for ultra marathons, I was teaching full time. So I'd find myself basically working, running, eating, and sleeping for the most part. And at one point, when I was just doing it essentially for free and enjoyment, I thought there's got to be a way I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, or, not only run for this 2-3 hour time period every day. And that's when I kind of discovered podcasts. I thought, well, if I'm going to be out here for this long, I may as well learn something while I'm doing it. And eventually I started kind of tuning into some endurance podcasts, and some would talk about like nutrition and things like that. And that's kind of when I was made aware of like Dr. Volek and Dr. Finney and some of their research and work. And around that same time, I had done what I would consider my first full season of ultra marathons. I ran, I think it was 350 milers in about a 9-week time frame in the fall of 2011. And at the end of that, I just when I just did a kind of an assessment, I'll do this at the end of any season or any race at this point, where I'll just kind of look back and reflect on things and just try to really tease out what's working and what's not working. And when I was being honest with myself, there seemed to be some things that weren't very sustainable with my lifestyle. The big elephant in the room, so to speak, was the big training volume and the racing and things like that. But it wasn't like my running was struggling mightily and I was still enjoying it. It was more just like the rest of the day outside of the trainings tended to take a big hit from the training. So I noticed things like I stopped being a good sleeper in high school and college. I was always able to kind of go to bed and sleep 8-9 hours and pop out of bed and not really give it much thought outside of that. And then by that point in my training, though, I found that I was blocking off sometimes 10 hours a night just to try to get 8 hours of sleep, because I'd wake up multiple times. And I also just noticed I had pretty big energy swings throughout the course of the day. I'd feel like I either had like all sorts of energy, I could do anything, or I could just sit down and take a nap. So those things just seemed like that if I kind of kept going that route, they weren't going to play out well for me from a long-term sustainability in the sport standpoint, potentially health as well. So I started exploring some options in terms of like what I could possibly do. And at the same time, I had kind of been hearing some of the stuff about the low carb stuff and thought I'd give it a shot. And when I did that, I had a pretty easy transition, I guess, relative to what you hear. I mean, some people have some horror stories when they're kind of switching over, but for me, it was pretty eventless for the most part. I went pretty strict keto for about the first month. And I noticed pretty quickly, like within the first week, I started sleeping through the night again, which was a pretty big sign to kind of, okay, I need to explore this more and kind of try to figure out what's going on here. And the other thing I noticed was, rather than kind of having this ebb and flow of energy during the day, I had more of an even keel, steady energy stream. And the one thing that stood out in the negative, I guess, in that first month was Fortunately for me, I knew just enough at the time probably to make sure I did this switch when I was in an off season. So I didn't really have any structured workouts I had to do. I was just out like running when I felt like it and running as slow as I needed to feel good and just enjoy what I was doing. Yeah. So the one thing I did notice during that phase though, is that the first like 4 weeks, it seemed like almost like every other run would be a scenario of I'd be feeling like I was running, say, a 7-minute mile pace, but then I'd look down on the watch and it'd be like an 8.5-minute mile pace. So I was getting less return for my investment, so to speak, in the running world. And that was concerning up until like, about 4 weeks where, again, I knew just enough to kind of stick to it a little bit longer than bailing out after the first week or two because of that. And since I had the affordability of being in the off season, I didn't have anything to rush into. So I let it kind of ride out. And by about a month in, that started to normalize, where my paces at those really low end endurance type intensity started to renormalize. So that was good. That was a positive sign in my mind. And then it just became a question of, well, what happens when I introduce structured training and start introducing things like we talked about earlier, short intervals, tempo runs, long runs, and actually have a periodized buildup? How would that impact a different nutrition strategy that I hadn't tried before? So that probably took me a good 1.5, 2 years to probably really fine tune. And what I ended up finding worked well for me was a low carbohydrate approach, but not necessarily strict ketogenic year round. There would be kind of phases during the year that made sense to bring my carbs kind of to ketogenic low levels where, they'd be 50 grams or less, but they were typically off season or what I call like a deload week, where I reduce volume and intensity and just kind of focus more on recovery. And then when I would get into kind of peak phases of training, I would just be a little more liberal with carbohydrates. They would stay still within kind of the framework of what most would probably consider low carbohydrate, but not necessarily like ketogenic low. So there'd be phases where, I might be doing 20 hours worth of training, both with running and strength work, mobility stuff. And, for those type of weeks, I might flex my carbs up to 20% of my intake just to kind of assist the fast forward I was pressing on my metabolism training that much. So that seemed to really work well for me. I didn't find that kind of reverting back to a moderate carbohydrate yielded a whole lot better results in my workouts. So I kind of teased out, I guess, what you'd call maybe a sweet spot for me, or what one of the guys I really like to follow these days is Dr. Mike Nelson, because he's always kind of like, I don't want to say sitting on the fence, but he to a degree he is, where like, I feel like if someone is pulling a little too far one way, he's like, well, let's pull you back a little bit this way. And you're just kind of finding that sweet spot for you so that you can really feel comfortable being able to run for long periods of time at a low intensity on water and electrolytes if you need to, but also, not have it just, come right back up if you do take in a carbohydrate source during a race or a hard workout and things like that. So it's kind of finding that balance for you, or that perfect medium. And the way I kind of like to describe it is I want to try to get fat adapted enough so that I don't have to try to, mainline fuel the entire time during a 12-hour event. But I can still take in some and kind of reap the benefits from that faster acting fuel source that most of my intra-race fuel is going to be coming from. And, but not have so much of it that I feel like my stomach's going to be the downturn for my results.
Man, that is so well explained. And man, I can totally like empathize with endurance athletes when their performance is decreasing because they're switching to a low carbohydrate diet, and you're seeing those times slip downward, and people bail on the diet because you don't want to go slower. And I wish more people would just ride it out like you did a little bit longer, or like you said, periodizing. I don't think a lot of people realize how important that periodization is with exercise and nutrition. Like there are times when you can have more carbohydrates and be just fine. You can maintain leanness, you can have more energy, your performance can increase. And there's other times when, you don't need it. You don't need all those carbohydrates. I think that's so well explained. And I think the point that you just made about, the gut bomb carbohydrates that so many endurance athletes have, that I had for years. And even just the logistics of carrying around all those products all day is it's so crazy. It's so nice to become fat adapted and access the fuel the way you did. I love that you made that point. So we're going to go from one Zach to another with a very different sports background. Where Zach Bitter was doing a lot of endurance sport, we're now going to hear from Zach Kushner, who was a football player with USC, who later in his life found a ketogenic diet and was able to lose a whole bunch of weight and make himself really healthy. He's got a great story. Go back to episode 144 of Boundless Body Radio if you want to hear the whole thing. But let's hear his personal story with low carbohydrate diets.
So in college, not only did I really enjoy football, but I got pretty into weightlifting as well. It was just something that I like to do, be in the weight room, compete against myself. And I would browse different bodybuilding forums to try and educate myself more on lifting and nutrition, in addition to all the information that I was receiving from strength conditioning coaches, as well as nutritionists that the football team provided us. And one day I came across this ketogenic diet and thought, wow, that sounds like something really cool, and maybe not the best for me right now because I'm trying to put on weight. But when my football career ends, I think this might be a good way to cut weight. And seeing that it was a high-fat diet and the type of foods, I was like, I love all these foods too. I mean, even as a little kid, I remember wanting to eat just plain pieces of butter and put sour cream on as much things as I could, and really liked steak and chicken and fish and all that. So when I read about the ketogenic diet, I'm like, wow, this is all of my favorite foods. Cut out the rest. I think this is something that I should try when I'm done playing. I implemented it and it worked wonders.
Wow. So what year was that you started to mix that in?
I believe I first started that in 2014. When I first knew my football career was done and decided, it's time to lose some weight, the first step I took, rather than dive straight into keto and do anything dramatic, was I cut out sugar and anything that I deemed to be unhealthy, not real food. I wasn't big on sweets, candies, ice cream, all that type of thing anyways, but made sure that I was proactively avoiding it. I then switched to what I called slow carb, where in addition to cutting out sugar, I was cutting out refined carbs, whether that be certain pastas and grain items, eating a lot of brown rice, quinoa when I was going to be eating my carbohydrates. And then from there, I decided, okay, let's go full on ketogenic, where I cut my carbs to below 20 net grams of carbohydrate per day. And the weight started just melting off.
Wow. So what other benefits did you notice? I think a lot of people will, take a look at a ketogenic diet because they want to lose weight or lose fat, but they notice other things along the way. Did you have any other things health-wise that you noticed as a benefit?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, to start, I do want to mention the first 5 weeks for me were very tough as my body was becoming adapted to running off of fat rather than glucose for energy, mixed in with a little bit of brain fog, tiredness, maybe a little irritability. And then at about the 5-week point is when I noticed things to really change. In addition to dropping water weight and some fat there, I really felt the cognitive benefits of it. I remember one day I'm in the office and I haven't eaten yet, and we're a couple hours past lunchtime, and I had just been focused in on my work since I had stepped in the door that morning and continued to go all day. And I was like, wow, these are the cognitive benefits I've been reading about. And, that's lasted me through whenever I've continued to eat in a ketogenic state. So that's been amazing. Of course, there's also the weight loss, losing the fat that I did. I lost a total of 92 pounds. I just generally feel so much healthier. For one of the examples I like to give is when I was bigger, trying to pack on weight. It wasn't an easy job. It looks fun trying to eat all this food, but at the same time, it can become overwhelming. And my body didn't want to put on more weight at that point. And let's say I was crossing the street. There's a couple seconds left, and I was like, all right, I gotta run across. It started getting to the point where, geez, I gotta take a few deep breaths after I run across. I shouldn't feel like this at all. The weight dropped off. I feel great, just feeling lighter. Moving around is so much easier. Not having to worry with any of those type of things that the additional weight that you're forcing on brings to you. So just my overall feeling of well-being, whether that's going to sleep at night, running around with friends and family, crossing the street in a hurry. I feel great. So it's something I'm really glad that I did, and really happy that I lost the weight to get my health where it is today.
That's a great answer. You have done a little bit of coaching, which I want to talk about here in a little bit. But before I do, just because you've done the coaching, I want to ask this question. 5 weeks, you said you felt pretty miserable for 5 weeks, which when you look back, those 5 weeks were years ago. Well, I mean, come on, like way worth it, like totally worth whatever suffering you had to go through. Obviously getting around to the other side's amazing. We just got a message from a shared client, Bethany and I, that said, I just ate one keto meal and I feel like a horrible person. I feel terrible right now. Is this how this is always going to feel? And my response was like, you're asking if this is what Bali is like when you're at the ticket counter of the very first airport before 3 different airplane transfers and a crappy bus ride until you get to Bali. Like, you're on the journey that's going to get you to this amazing place. And once you're there, you don't ever have to leave. And so I'm really curious. You have this background of like pushing through, the grit, the determination, the sports, everything you learned, how to drive and be strong with your teammates and everything like that. As you're coaching somebody, is it really like a mindset thing that people need to just push through, or are there things that they can do to lessen the misery for themselves? Because those 5 weeks can feel pretty long when you're in them. It's totally worth it when you're on the other side. But I'm just wondering if it's like a mindset question of that's something that set you apart that other people maybe don't have as a tool.
Oh, 100%. And I really do like that Bali analogy. I may steal it if you allow me to.
I stole it too.
I remember when I first started, as I said, I was not feeling very great. Now, I had done a lot of research going into it, and I read story after story of other people who didn't feel great, and responses were, keep on trucking, just get through this. It's going to be horrible at first, and then you're going to break through to the other side, and you're going to be glad that you did. So I told myself, you know what? I am going to stick to and trust the plan, and I'm going to come out on the other side, and nothing's going to stop me. It really came down to discipline and determination. And I'm a week and a half in. It would have been so easy to just give up, go get, a pizza and a pint of ice cream and be like, screw this. I'm so much happier this way. But I didn't cave. I went through those 5 weeks. And a little side note there, I read that for most people, it takes 2 to 3 weeks. So for whatever reason, it took me longer. And I thought I'm going to continue on until I feel good. When I broke through, I was so happy that I did it. And never looked back.
It's almost like that kind of suffering is the exact sign that you're looking for that tells you that it's working. You should feel terrible. And again, it's like, what if you're standing in line, with 150 other smelly people trying to get on a plane, like that's a sign that you're going to Bali. Like, you're going to Bali. Why do people bail? Why don't people ride it out a little bit longer?
I think it's just so easy to give into temptation. A quote I like to tell people is don't trade what you want the most for what you want at the moment. And I think a lot of people just really lose sight of that long-term goal that they have when they have the opportunity to just walk down the street to 7-Eleven or go to a local restaurant and get something that they know is going to provide them with that instant satisfaction. It's so easy to succumb to. So you really need to get disciplined and develop that mindset going into it, and just tell yourself, these situations are going to come, and I'm going to be mentally prepared to tell the little man or woman in my head, no, I'm not going to give in. I'm going to keep on going till I get to my destination.
So Zach reported feeling not very good for 5 weeks. So that is a very, very long time. And as I've done this for longer and longer, I've realized that you can reduce that time a whole lot. If you do nothing else, go back to the original advice from our exclusive content with Ben Azadi to learn how you can make that keto flu be much, much, much better. It should not take that long. It should not be that difficult. So do not let that deter you from trying a low carbohydrate diet if that's what you want to try. Next, we are going to hear from the ketogenic mom, Jen Winkler, who we interviewed in episode episode 299 of Boundless Body Radio. And this is a person who should have been introduced to a ketogenic diet very early in life to be able to deal with seizures, which, as she will explain, we have known for about 100 years that ketogenic diets work wonders with epilepsy and seizures, and it should have been presented as one of the very first things that she could try rather than be medicated. But let's hear her story now. For somebody who doesn't really know, kind of a brief history about like epilepsy and epilepsy treatments. I think more people now kind of, tie those two things together and epilepsy can be connected to ketogenic and more people recognize that. But this isn't new. This isn't something somebody figured out like 5-10 years ago. Can you talk a little bit about how we originally were treating this?
Yeah. So in the early 1900s was when they had discovered the ketogenic diet or therapeutic ketogenic diet for children with epilepsy. So they were having kids having seizures. The way they would treat the children was put them in their hospital, and they would make them fast. I believe it was about 48 hours to get the ketones going. So they couldn't eat. It was 24 to 48, somewhere in there. They would make them fast so that the ketones get built up in the body and start healing the brain. And what I'm assuming is the gut as well, because as most people know, there's a deep connection with our gut and our brain. They consider our gut our second brain. So they would start the fast, and then they would start the ketogenic diet on the children, where it would be a very high fat. I think typically back then it was about an 80% of the calories was fat, and then 20% was protein and carbs. So pretty much almost always the children stopped having seizures. They didn't have to stay ketogenic, but back then it was kind of like, there wasn't processed foods back then. It was just their basic foods. There were maybe a few little things here and there, but nothing like what we have today. So they were still pretty healthy. They were having their veggies and their, maybe a toast with breakfast or something like that. As time evolved, pharmaceuticals came into the picture, and they developed the first medication for anti-epilepsy medication. And then when there was another one, they said, why do we need to force kids to eat what I would call a healthy diet, but they called it ketogenic? Why force them to eat a different way when they can just pop a pill? And that has really become the mentality of not just epilepsy, but of many things these days, of heart disease, of blood pressure, of diabetes. Let's just stick ourselves with insulin every single time, So that's where that started. And now there's a plethora of different medications that they will give adults and children alike. It's very rare that they will try ketogenic first. Johns Hopkins Hospital has done a lot of research with this. They now actually, I think for about 12 or 13 years, have had a whole section dedicated for ketogenic for adults now. And people can fly there. They can have, training on how to do it for themselves, because it is very different. You can put a child in a hospital for a week, 2 weeks. It's very easy for that to happen. An adult, not so much. So there's lots of research with it. And I think Johns Hopkins has about 7 editions now on their ketogenic and modified Atkins book. And this last one has tons of stuff to show the evidence of how it can treat Alzheimer's, autism, ADHD, Parkinson's, pretty much almost any neurological disease. But yeah, if you really dig hard in the epilepsy world of it, they typically say they will try one medication. If the medication doesn't work, try a new medication. If that medication doesn't work, try a dual medication, so having 2 medications, which is where I was at. And if that doesn't work, you just keep adding at that point. What it's supposed to be, and some places will do, is after the dual one, then they try the diet. Then they try the ketogenic. Really, it should be like the opposite. Try the diet first instead of infiltrating the body with so much foreign substance. But yeah, they didn't even approach it that way to me. I had to be the one to be my own advocate and try the diet.
Wow. And it's like the knowledge that we had because of the medications, it just kind of almost like went away. And now we have things like the Charlie Foundation and all these things like bringing it back to light. That was what, 90s that was starting to happen, where it was like, wait, we did this in the past. Where did this go? It's crazy. And if you told me like, yeah, we developed these drugs and the drug is like 80% better than the diet, like, okay, great. This is great advancement of science and we're making progress, but that's just never the case. And that says nothing for any of the side effects. I mean, what side effects were you noticing on some of those medications?
So the first one I was on, I think it was only 2 or 3 weeks when I was 12. So I know nothing of that one. Then they put me on Depakote, which is valproic acid. They said it was one of the safest ones that you could be on. It was a relatively new one back then. That one is what caused the insulin resistance in me. It is what caused me to gain as a teenager, which you can only imagine a teenage girl gaining up to over 200 pounds. It was killer on my self-esteem.
Awful.
It caused mental issues where the depression was very strong. The PCOS grew stronger as well. So having symptoms like, I can never say the word, but the one where there was like hair growing on your chin, the hirsutism or something like that. I would have that. It would be like little things as a teen. You go to a sleepover when you wake up, even if I like shaved it or waxed it or whatever, wake up and it's there and you got to kind of hide so no one knows. It's so my self-esteem took the biggest toll, to be honest. But it was all those things. Pancreatitis, when I was in college, I was hospitalized with pancreatitis for a whole week. I was put under. I don't remember much because the pain was just so excruciatingly strong. Switched my medication from Depakote to Lamictal. I was on Lamictal. I had tons of breakthrough seizures. I had 1 or 2 before studying abroad in Austria for a whole semester. I was in Europe for 5 months, had 6 seizures there, came back. Then they started the dual therapy. So after that, that's when there was like up and down with the mental health part. Went on Lamictal, my mental health was a little better. Then when they did the dual, it was kind of back and forth. So I would say definitely the depression, anxiety, panic attacks were probably some of the hardest parts most recently, before lowering the medications I was on now.
Wow.
So
yeah, I mean, those are severe complications that you're talking about. And I just think about the window of time between, you hearing the word ketogenic in 2005 to 2018 when hearing it again, like that's 13 years. That's a long time to be dealing with some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And there was a lot of anger. I had to forgive. I had to get over. Understanding sometimes doctors, they just don't know what's the newest research. They don't have time, unfortunately, with their hands tied with insurance policies to actually go and look at PubMed and go look at the newest research. And I don't mean to downplay my previous neurologist when she just said, I don't know, because she was sincere. She didn't know. And she actually had epilepsy herself. So I tend to wonder, like, if I had stayed with her and told her, hey, this is working for me, like, would she try it herself as a doctor? So.
Yeah. That's so interesting. This is where I get so frustrated. I'm sure you do too. When people say this diet is not maintainable, you can't sustain this for the long term. Does that drive you bonkers?
Yes and no. I think inside it does. But I try to have mercy on people more. Like, okay, they don't have the education or maybe they didn't read what I've read, the studies that I've read. They don't have the experience that I have doing it. So I try to just have a merciful heart on it and be like, okay, and shove it aside. You know what? It's going to be everywhere. So it's a yes and a no. Myself, if someone tells me like, you shouldn't do this is bad for you, you can't do it long term, yes, that's going to bother me. If they're just saying it generally in the air, I'm like, okay, whatever, shoo it off. I can't take on stuff like that. I don't have the mental power to do that. So yeah, I do believe you can do it long term because our ancestors did it long term. As long as you're doing it properly, eat the fruits and the vegetables that are in season. Have a primarily animal-based diet. Like you look at when it was like cavemen or whatever, that time, they weren't hoarding up vegetables from a grocery store. They weren't holding eggs all the time even. It was just, okay, let's go and kill. They still do it. The Maasai tribe, they're going out, killing the animals to eat, drinking the blood, doing all that stuff.
The next two people we are going to hear from are people that have an extensive background in sports and in personal training. So we're first going to hear from Krishna Hanks, who was a professional dancer for most of her career. She later got into Pilates and personal training and wellness coaching. And we're going to hear her story about how she found a low carbohydrate diet and how she was able to fix some of the problems that she was noticing in herself and with her clients. If you want to hear the whole story, we interviewed her on episode 304 of Boundless Body Radio. Do you feel like you're the healthiest you've ever been in your entire life right now?
I think I'm at one of those stages where I feel extremely vibrant. Yes. It's hard to remember exactly how you felt when you were 20, or let's say when I was a teenager turning backflips down a basketball court. But I feel much better than I did when I was 40, for sure. Overcoming some, health issues due to nutrition, but definitely I think, there's no reason that many, many people my age shouldn't also feel vibrantly healthy. And I think that if there's anything I hope to inspire and empower people is to take charge of your health.
Yeah, I love that so much. I get a little frustrated, and I'm wondering if you do too, when people just look around and see everybody else just on that slow, kind of steady decline into aging, and we just say it's normal, or we call it dad bod, or it's just normal to have your back hurt, or your joints hurt, or poor digestion, and you're just gaining all this weight and taking medications. Does that ever frustrate you that that's become so normalized?
Completely. A perfect example is someone if I go, for a routine checkup or something, they always say, what are your medications? And I say, none. And they're like flabbergasted, right? The eyebrows go up, the eyes open wide. I think we've so come to accept that, like, I'm going to use 50 as a number, but it might even be less, that once you hit 50 and above, it just starts going down, right? Your movement skills deplete, your energy depletes. As you mentioned, all these things like joint problems, issues. I strongly, inherently believe it doesn't have to be that way. And we've got a lot of really amazing role models within particularly the low carb community. Look at Mark Sisson, he's 68, looks phenomenal, right? You can go on the list of numerous people in this field who are on the aging trajectory, but they still have vibrant health. And that's kind of my word. I think it's, you really have to invest in your understanding of what nutrition does, getting, a good exercise routine. And I think maybe the biggest challenge for many people my age is we've been told to fear everything, right? To fear fat, to fear saturated fat, particularly, to fear the sunshine, right? To, fear even protein, right? That all of the fear is not really serving us well as we age, in my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I love that you mentioned some of those people, some of our, absolute favorite people in this space. And you're right. Such an example. And so are you. Such an example of somebody who, maybe your life was going down a different path, which I do want to talk about, but you changed that. You turned that around and now you're healthy and vibrant. You used a word that I really wanted to talk about with you today, which is investment. So I want to make sure that we go back to that. You recently wrote about this in a wonderful article, and all of your writing is absolutely fantastic. I want to go back to that. But before we do, I do want to hear a little bit about your story. I know you have a background in dance and Pilates, and you had some things kind of go wrong in your 40s. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So, sort of short version of the background to lead to what I call my health story or my food story is I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up with, kind of basic, my mom was a fabulous cook on a really tight budget. We were a one income family. But she, cooked meat, vegetables, all those kind of, I grew up with that, right? I started dancing professionally around the age of 15, right? That lasted me to about the age of 43, something like that, which is pretty long for a dancer. along the way, that's when I also, as any dancer knows, you have to be able to do multiple things just to survive. I taught dance. I certified in Iyengar yoga, classical Pilates. I was a personal trainer for many companies in New York. I worked also for a company called Homebodies. So I was doing all kinds of movement things along the way, right? As you already mentioned in the opening, I've got 2 degrees or 3 degrees, bachelor's and master's from Indiana University in kinesiology, and then later my MBA. But all of those things, right, I was doing, but I did the MBA after I stopped dancing, but throughout that dance career along the way. But my food story begins after I stopped dancing or was winding down. I had been pretty much for the last 2 decades of my performing career a vegetarian. And somewhere towards the end of my dance, early 40s or something, I started having like these very, very severe, what I call joint issues, right? So going from someone at the top of their game, I could do anything with my body. Anything I ask it, it would do. To where sitting and standing was a challenge, right? So joints swollen, knuckles big, just debilitating, right? So I had to really kind of figure out how to manage my day because I could only do a certain amount over the course of the day. I was at that time working in an executive coaching for an executive coaching company in the Netherlands. They're very kind. Everybody was very supportive on that. But I spent what I call 2 years on the medical hamster wheel. Oh, you must have rheumatoid arthritis. Oh, you have some strange autoimmune disease. Or maybe you've got, some kind of rare infection that you picked up somewhere along the way. It was literally 2 years of no ideas, really. But meanwhile, I wasn't getting better. In fact, I was getting worse. Sort of at the end of that 2 years, I was having dinner with a good friend who was also this fabulous physical therapist named Ted Wilhelmsen. He's no longer with us, sadly. He was specialized in dancers. And anyway, we were just having dinner. And he said, have you ever thought about your diet? I flabbergasted, got big eyes go up. And I said, what do you mean my diet's perfect? I'm vegetarian, I don't eat this, I don't eat that. And he kind of looked at me like, yeah, maybe that's the problem, right? So I went home, I thought about it. First thing the next morning, I called him and apologized because I was not very nice to him. I felt really bad about being so negative. I said, I apologize, but I'm listening. And maybe there is something here because you're the only person who ever said that. After 2 years, all kinds of specialists, you name it, I saw it, I did every test possible. No one ever said anything about nutrition.
Wow.
Yeah. And I thought about it. Well, all I can do is try it, right? So I slowly, probably as every or I call myself a recovering vegetarian, you start with the eggs and you segue a little bit into the meat. Bit by bit, just started adding back the things in and things started to change. It was pretty phenomenal, right? And I thought, wow, there's really something to this power of nutrition. I thought about my whole life has been about moving, right? How do I make my body move the best it can move, right? I always thought I was fueling it okay, right? Because I was still able to do everything until I couldn't. And then my husband, the fabulous guy that he is, read this article in 2002 by Gary Taubes called "What If It's All Been a Big Fat Lie?" And just the light bulbs went up for me. Like, wow, I've got inflammation or something, right? Maybe, through all my years of putting more and more carbohydrates in my diet, lots of bread, the Netherlands is a very heavy bread culture, sugar. I substituted lots of protein and things like that for carbohydrates. And so then we both sort of went down that rabbit hole of reading everything we could read, right? And then his book, Bad Calories came out, and it just was a game changer, completely. My health, I think now, and I think like everybody, first you add the meat back in and those kind of things, but then the whole idea of really reducing the carbohydrates, right, made a whole new path of health in that way. And I think part of, and I've said this many times to people, so weight was not an issue for me. So I think people just assume if you're, kind of a normal body weight or, thin, I'm slender, that there can be nothing wrong with your nutrition. It must just be okay, right? We see people with poor metabolic health who are, they now have a name, the TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, right? But I think that's why no one ever really thought to have the conversation with me. And I think that's something really missing, right? In many, many health conversations.
Yeah. Wow. That's absolutely amazing. What a cool journey that you've been on. And I'm really curious. Before we got online, we were talking about the book that I'm listening to currently that just came out, The Great Plant-Based Con. And it is so good. Jane Buxton does such an amazing job in this book. And I remember this line that she just said, which is basically like, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. That's pretty accurate. First of all, I agree with that 100%. But it's also the same kind of truth in nutrition, where it's like, if you don't pay attention to what's going on nutritionally, you're pretty uninformed. But if you start researching nutrition, what you learn is probably just a load of crap. You're probably learning that all these plants and carbohydrates are really good for you, and we need to follow the food pyramid and limit saturated fat and meat. It's going to cause cancer, which is just complete and utter garbage. So I'm just wondering for you, how difficult was it for you to unlearn all the things that you thought were so healthy and learn this new paradigm shift that's going completely against the grain of what anybody's saying?
I think there may be multiple things. Well, first, it really helped that the two of us, we don't have children. It's just my husband and I in our house, really went down the investigative research route ourselves, right? So that we were kind of discussing things, debating things, and talking about it in that way. Another piece that was highly influential is, I was living outside of the country for close to a couple decades, right? So let's say, late 80s, 90s, early part of 2000. And every time I came back to visit family or friends into the United States, I kept seeing people just started looking worse. And it wasn't a weight thing. It wasn't that they were just getting larger, but they, looked energyless. They looked in poor health, posture, you saw more and more people walking with walkers or needing assistance in the airport. So a sort of thing, it was like a story playing in my head, like what's going on? Also seeing that many, many people were just exercising crazy amounts and still having health issues, right? So, believing that whole idea that you can exercise away a poor diet. So those things caused me to still, think critically. And maybe it's easier to have a little critical eye when you're not, in the United States, right? In fact, one of my very first blogs, I started blogging in 2010, I believe, around there, just after Gary Taubes was the first. It's titled "Let's Change the Conversation." Something that I picked up on in Europe, people don't sit at the dinner time and talk about calories and, is this healthy and that, but in America, there's kind of an obsession, right? Oh, should I eat that or shouldn't I eat that? It was bizarre, kind of two sides. And certainly things probably have changed a lot. But I think it's having a different lens. And the other thing is being in the fitness industry so long, whether it's, I include, let's say I was in the performing arts, I did a lot of personal training and fitness in that way. Just seeing that people struggle at all ages with weight, particularly, and with figuring out nutrition. So we say, well, what people are advising, it's just not working, right? And, I think that maybe growing up in the Midwest, my parents also, very opinionated, had their own ideas. I was grown up to use your own critical thinking skills. Maybe that also influenced me to not say, it's just not working. And then my own personal experience, it didn't work for me either.
Yeah. Yeah. Same. All these personal training books behind me tell me exactly what I need to tell my people. They need to eat plenty of meals and plenty of snacks and lots of whole grains. I would tell people, like, you have to eat 9 to 11 servings of vegetables every single day. I couldn't do that. I did all the smoothies and all the salads and buying all of this produce wrapped in plastic and put in plastic bags, and I did all of it. And you throw food away at the end of the week. Not only does it not work if you can pull it off, but I don't even think anybody could even pull it off to begin with anyway. It was so frustrating.
And I think, what you're touching on, it seems to me, is like, we talk a lot about the weight, and absolutely low carb, high fat is very good at helping people get to a weight that's healthy for them. However, there are so many other benefits, right? To exactly what you're saying is, you don't have to eat 6 to 7 to 8 meals a day, right? I think Zoe Harcob has this phrase is, unless you want to be the size of a cow, why would you graze all day long, right? And it, for me too, I know when I was really heavily carb based, I was many hours a day hangry. Right. I could come out of a rehearsal, just 5 or 6 hours straight of rehearsal dance and say, if I don't get something to eat right now, I'm going to bite somebody's head off. That's not normal. And we have normalized this idea that, you should be slung up on your blood sugar, dropped off, and then, let's do it again. Right. Let's see how many times we can do it during the day. And that is one that's completely changed with this lifestyle is, your meals are sustainable to the next meal, right? And actually, it's not that different. I grew up in a family that said, don't snack because you'll ruin your meal. And somehow, from the era of the dietary guidelines, and again, I'm not a researcher, I'll leave that to the brilliancy of Taubes and Ty Schultz, and it sounds like Jade Buxton as well now. But from that period on, it sort of like encouraged people to just eat all the time, and it doesn't work.
Yep, that's right. I love Jason Fung, how he talks about like the little kids, like soccer match. Like they can't even go out and play a simple soccer match without like Gatorade and, maybe fruit. When I was growing up, it was at least like orange slices that you had to eat. But now it's just all kinds of processed crap. Like these kids don't need to be eating all of this stuff. They're just playing around. They're playing a game. Yeah,
it is very true. And it's very sad because they don't have a chance, right? One of the fabulous teachers in the Noakes Foundation coach practitioner path is Bitten Janssen.
Amazing.
She's the sugar, I call her the sugar addiction specialist. And she said, what we're battling is that this indoctrination, right? At a very young age, you start getting incredible amounts of sugar. Right. And then as that dependency comes along, you need more of it. Right. And then you need more of it. And that's just going to be a constant battle. And one of the things I feel most proud about with some of my clients is this feeling to, like we talked about at the beginning, take charge of your health is once you can get yourself away from that need to snack all the time, it's very liberating.
So liberating.
Right? To go, wow, I don't have to pack a bag full of stuff. When I was dancing on the tour, people used to joke about me. I'm 5'2", I'm around 100 pounds, that my bag was bigger than me, right? Because I, again, this hungry a lot. You hoard food, right? You want to make sure you got all the stuff in your bag and, that you've got like your food for 2 days. I don't need that anymore. right? You have a meal, you wait to the next meal.
The next fitness professional that we are going to hear from is Bronson Dant. Bronson is a personal trainer who owns his own personal training studio and is the author of the Ultimate Ketogenic Fitness book, a complete guide to optimizing keto for a better quality of life. He is somebody we love learning from. I love how he answers some of the questions here, especially when we talk about the difference between health and fitness and the difference between diet versus exercise to drive the best results for either one of those two things. Tell us, I've heard you answer this question before, and I think it's really important to distinguish. Can you tell us what your definition of fitness is?
Oh, but my definition of fitness is the ability to express your physical ability, your freedom through physical activity, right? So the ability to say, I am free. I live in a free country. I can do what I want to do, and I have the physical ability to do it.
So
that
basically, everything that I desire to do in my day fits into what I'm capable of doing.
Absolutely. I have nothing in my life that my physical conditioning, my health, because this is the key about this thing, right? Is fitness and health are the same thing. They are not different. There is no distinction between I'm improving my health and I'm improving my fitness. They are both the same. So my health is not going to the things that I can let me rephrase that. The things that I can control about my health and my fitness are not limitations in my life.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great definition. I know you work with, fitness is what we consider maybe like the exercise portion of things. I know that fitness is not the best definition of that. It also includes so many other things. But as you're weighing like the exercise portion of things versus the nutrition portion of things, how do you balance those two things out?
They are equally important.
Yeah.
50-50.
Perfect.
50-50. That you can't do one without the other if you want to improve your quality of life. You can do one without the other if you're just worried about getting back to baseline. Okay. So nutrition, a lot of people start with nutrition. I did it backwards. I started with fitness. I'm a little bit odd. A lot of people start with nutrition and they lose weight and think that now they're healthy. What they don't realize is they're not unhealthy, right? But they are also not optimized. There's a difference between coming to baseline, which means lacking illness, and then being able to perform and protect and increase your longevity and quality of life, which is different. So nutrition, I like to break it down into two ways. When we talk about stress, right? We talk about inflammation all the time. Inflammation is the big buzzword, right? Reduce inflammation, you're going to feel better, you're going to be better, you're going to be healthier. Nutrition helps you reduce internal stress, right? It's more of a biological internal function that helps you reduce chronic stress on the systems within your body, right? Fitness, the fitness component of improving your health helps you reduce and manage external stress. So it's more about the external things, the physiology of your body and how your body can deal with external stresses. So you can improve your health and get to where internal stress is less. But if you don't do anything to address how your body handles external stress, you will still feel the impact internally and vice versa. If your internal stress is off, you're going to feel it in the external manifestations of that, and being tired and weak and all those other sorts of things. So they feed off of each other. You need to deal with both of them.
Yeah, I love that. How has your understanding of nutrition changed over time? I know you said you do the carnivore diet, and so does your mom for the last few years.
Oh my gosh.
How has everything evolved in the last little while?
Yeah. How much time do you have?
As long as you like.
I had a client call a couple of days ago, and the entire call was basically just explaining to him that everything. It was kind of crazy because he was talking about, talking to this guy. He's got all these issues he's dealing with gut issues and IBS and ulcers and all sorts of things. And throughout the conversation, he kept mentioning that one day he decided he was just going to eat a steak and he felt great. He didn't have any pain at all that day. And then a couple months later, he's like, I saw this guy on YouTube. He said he was just eating eggs. So I tried a day where I just ate eggs. I felt great. So he kept saying all these things and then going back and saying, but that can't be right. What about my cholesterol? What about vitamins? What about this? What about that? And I just kind of looked at him. I said, regardless of what you've been told and how we've all been educated over the years on what health food is, the definition of health food, eat the rainbow, you got to get your greens, blah, 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 all that stuff. If you're eating it and it's not helping you get healthy, then it's not health food. That's probably the biggest thing that I've had to learn. And the biggest change is that just because modern society says something is so, if it doesn't do that for me, then it's not so.
Mm. Yeah, it's super interesting. Over the last few years, coaching so many people who are trying to do the carnivore diet, it's almost like you're there just to give them permission. Like a lot of people already know,
right.
just like this guy, like he knows he feels better. Like I eat a steak, I feel amazing. My symptoms get better. My energy goes up. My mental clarity and probably things like gratitude, spirituality, whatever else is improving. But I know that also my heart is going to blow up at some point. And so most of what I do with my people is like, no, I'm just giving you permission that you can follow this lead. You're going to be just fine, and just make sure that you're still feeling really well, because that's probably what's going to happen.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Excellent. How long did it take for you to transition over to a carnivore diet?
A day.
I love it.
I started, so I heard about it late in April 2018, listened to some videos, read up on it a little bit, and then decided May 1st, 2018, I said, I'm just going to do this, and started doing it. So whatever meat we had in the house, that's what I ate. When that ran out, I went to the store and got more. And I haven't gone back since.
Yeah. You were 13 months ahead of me. So I'm a little jealous. What things did you notice immediately that felt better and let you know that this is the way you should be eating for life?
I think the first thing was sleep. My sleep instantly, almost instantly got better. Before I realized that, so one of the reasons that I did it was because I had epic issues with my gut and my digestion. Within a few months, it was probably even sooner than a few months, but I didn't really realize it because I was in such a habit of living my life a certain way around my digestive issues, that it took me a while to realize, like, hey, I'm going through all these hoops and whistles and trying to manage what could happen if I have to go to the bathroom somewhere. But I realized that none of it's ever happened. Like I haven't had to. Wait a second, what's going on here? So, I had my digestive issues basically ran my life, and I hadn't even realized how much they had until I didn't have to deal with it anymore.
Yeah.
And that was a couple to a few months.
Wow. No, I've heard you describe that before. And that sounds, it sounds not only awful, but like borderline traumatic, frankly.
Right. Well, it is. It's frustrating too. Especially when you're with a partner, and every time we got to do something, they've got to wait for you to go to the bathroom once. And then you get in the car and you're like, nah, I'm going to go back in and try again. And then you're in the car and you're halfway there and you're like, crap, we got to stop. I go to the back. Like it's really ridiculous. Absolutely. It's really ridiculous.
Wow.
No one should have to live that way.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So over time, a lot of people would say that if you're eating carnivore, yes, you're getting plenty of protein, but without getting a sufficient amount of carbohydrates, you're not going to be able to build muscle, or your body's going to sacrifice protein for gluconeogenesis to produce the glucose that you need, even if it's a small amount. What has your experience been as far as muscle mass and carnivore diets, or muscle mass in relation to, having a zero carbohydrate intake?
Yeah, so I don't... Anybody that says that you need carbs to build muscle I don't know. Honestly, I honestly don't know where that information came from, because even when I looked it up years ago, I couldn't find anything that says you need carbs to build muscle, because you don't. I mean, the only thing you need to build muscle is protein and proper stimulation of the muscle. So that's it. My experience, I've put on muscle over the past 4 years. I've improved my body composition. I've improved every single performance metric you can possibly think of, from range of motion to endurance to strength to stamina. I mean, every aspect of fitness that you can think of. We talked about the 20 different components of health and fitness. Every single one over the past 4 years has improved. Wow. So carbs are not. Here's the thing. Gluconeogenesis is a tool that your body uses when it needs something. So if you need to do something that is glycolytic, it will provide glycogen for you to do it. You don't have to eat carbs in order for that to happen.
Yeah, that's right. And when it does that, it provides the exact precise amount that you need. It almost seems like the preferred way the body would do that to keep, blood sugar perfectly in control.
Well, here's the other thing that people may not know is that ketogenesis feeds gluconeogenesis, right? So the byproducts of ketones, right, acetate, pyruvate, and lactate, actually feed into the Cori cycle and the Krebs cycle. So they help the body fuel itself besides just BHB. So we talk about ketones all the time, get fat adapted, use ketones for fuel. BHB is pretty much the key component when we talk about that. But we don't talk about the fact that the byproducts of acetone, right, go into other cycles that fall under the umbrella of gluconeogenesis to provide fuel for the body to do other sorts of activities.
Yeah, no.
So they actually work with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. Another thing, and you can validate this because you've got a tool available to you, which I do want to talk about in detail here in a minute. But I want, in your opinion, is it possible to lose fat and gain muscle at the same time?
Absolutely.
Good answer.
All the time. I do it. I see people do it all the time.
Do you remember being told that that was not possible?
Yeah. Well, that was the second reason. So that was actually the second reason I went carnivore. Because I basically I started carnivore. It was a few months after the Baker Rogan interview, and that's where I was introduced to it. I heard that, I listened to that interview. Somewhere in that, something clicked in my head because, again, thinking that I was a fitness guy, thinking that I was in shape and all this stuff. I really, I was married at the time. I was married at the time to someone who was a nutritionist. And we were very much in the traditional thought of bulking and cutting, right? If I want to get strong, I have to get fat. If I want to get lean, I have to get weak. And it was really frustrating to consistently be in this cycle of, I feel great about my strength and my capability, but I look like a marshmallow, or I look fantastic and I feel great about my appearance, but I can't do squat because I'm weak as hell. Like I just got frustrated with that whole cycle. So that was the second reason I was interested in carnivore, because it intrigued me that I could potentially lose body fat and not lose my strength. Wow. Right? Because here I am listening to Sean Baker, who's a world-class athlete, talking about how his performance has not decreased. He's gotten stronger and he's gotten leaner at the same time. And I'm like, well, I don't understand how that works. Now I do, and I love it. And I understand it, and I can explain it to people, and I help people do it all the time.
Brother, you and I had vastly different reactions to that episode of Joe Rogan. I to this day, I've mentioned this many times on our show. To this day, I have not finished that episode because I turned it off halfway through and said, this guy is absolutely insane. And I had to tell him that when I hosted him on our show. I told Sean Baker, Dr. Sean Baker, sorry, I still haven't listened to your episode on Joe Rogan, even though it was like the most influential, podcast I've ever listened to in my life. And I only listened to half of it. No, yeah. That's such a great point. I can totally relate to that. It's like one of the two. You're either leaning and you feel terrible, or you feel really great, but you have extra fat, and you wouldn't imagine that you can optimize both at the same time when it's absolutely possible. I love that your answer to the question was you laughing, which is, kind of the way I would react. We see it all the time. And you ask every dude, what is your goals? I want more muscle and less fat. It's like, well, I pretty much can help you with that pretty easily. It's not going to be that hard. Yeah.
Yep.
Dude, that's awesome. We love that content from Bronson. He's doing great work. And I'm so glad that we went there with that conversation, that we were both able to talk about using body fat scales that were able to validate the fact that, yes, you can add muscle mass and lose fat at the same time. You don't have to compromise on either one of those things. And I love that message. And I love that he's also out there sharing that message. We are now going to go to Lierre Keith. This is somebody who did a plant-based, low-fat diet about as well as you possibly could. She was a vegetarian and vegan for the better part of 2 decades to the detriment of her health, which you are going to hear, the plant-based diet message is so enticing. It's really easy to get sucked up into without realizing how much damage it can do to people. We have talked to several people in this podcast who are fully carnivore, or if not fully carnivore, fully strict carnivore. They are very much of an animal-based diet, getting most of their calories from saturated fat and proteins that come from animals. And I just want you to pay attention to how she's describing that she was feeling when she was vegetarian and vegan versus how all the other people that we've talked to have talked about how they feel eating a more animal-based diet. Leah Keith is such a badass. We absolutely love her and her work. We've interviewed her twice. This is from the original conversation we had almost 2 years ago now, back in episode 67, with my wife Bethany actually jumping in as the co-host as well. A criticism that I hear quite often is that when somebody gets off of a vegan diet, it's because they didn't really try hard enough. And so I'm just going to throw that right at you. I know your story. I don't think you really tried that hard. I mean, Did you really give it a fair shake, Leah? Come on.
What's really funny about that is that there are, in fact, people, I think especially a lot of young men who don't know how to cook. And when they go vegan, they just take a bunch of stuff out, but they don't really know how to provide for themselves in any way. Wow. And they really do just become junk food vegans. And I've met them, and they eat cookies and potato chips and soda all day long. And of course, that's not going to work for anybody. But I think most people who go vegan really do try. And most of us enjoy cooking, like we're into food and we're into the whole concept. And for me, I had like charts on my refrigerator that were about how to combine your proteins and, like what was in kidney beans and what was in brown rice. And I was so insane. I wouldn't eat ketchup if there was sugar in it. I was so opposed to eating white sugar, and I never ate white flour. That was whole 20 years. I literally never ate a piece of white bread. No white rice, certainly. It was absolutely whole beans, whole grains, it was just, and back then, because I started this in like 1980, the thing that they didn't have all of those soy-based meat analogs, which are highly processed poisons, but none of that existed. Like you couldn't go to the store and buy like tempeh bacon and like those fake bologna slices and the weird vegan cheese and all of those easy fast food kind of vegan things that they have now. None of that existed. So if you were going to do this, you really, really had to cook.
Wow. And
you had to cook rice and beans. Like that's pretty much what we ate, with vegetables, of course. But, the bulk of the food was, some kind of rice and some kind of bean. And so it was in some ways healthier than what they have now, because with all that, the soy milk alone is just deadly. And then none of that existed. Like I remember the first time seeing soy milk in a grocery store and just, of course, being thrilled because I was a vegan. But it would have been worse, I think, for me if all of that stuff had existed. And so, all of this is to say is I did it as whole food and natural and whatever, that anybody could have done it.
Right.
And it just was a disaster.
That's so crazy. Yeah. I think if there's one person on this planet that can write this book, it's absolutely you. I heard you talking about like frying tofu in vegetable oil. I almost like gagged. Oh, yeah. Like, oh, that sounds terrible. So you started back in 1980.
Let's see, I was 16. So it was 1980, 1981. Yeah. Would have been early 1981. Yeah.
What was it that got you to start trying it?
Well, I got into it in the way that most people get into it, which is you meet somebody who's already doing it and you are convinced. So I was converted. I met another teenage girl whose family, they were all vegans. They were super into being vegans. They had, in fact, moved to Boston to be with other vegans. So it was just vegan. So I entered that whole world. And at that point, it was such a small little community that you got to know everybody really quickly. But, there's definitely, when you do extreme things, in many, many realms, you can end up in these sort of cult-like little cul-de-sacs. And that is where I ended. If you're only talking to people who believe these things, when it starts to fail you, it's really hard to get out because it's an echo chamber. This is certainly not the only little subculture that does this, but that's where I ended. And when all your friends are doing it and there's nobody can question it because, you're going to lose everyone and everyone's going to get mad at you. And it's just this constant reinforcement that, oh, do it this way, try it that way, go and do this instead. You'll be fine. There's no way this is wrong. And then one by one, people fall out because, of course, it doesn't work. And eventually the rubber does hit the road. And one by one, all of those people had to start eating animal products. And I was the last holdout. I mean, It was like, I was just so extreme, because I couldn't give it up until I was half dead. But
16 too, that's such a developmental formative year, especially for a female. That's what kinds of consequences did your body suffer from that?
My poor brain. I feel like it never quite myelinated correctly, That's the thing. That's one of the things that happens when you're a teenager is it's all of that myelin, all of that sheathing has to happen in the brain. And your frontal lobes go offline for a while, which is why teenagers are a little bit crazy. But then, it all has to kind of reconnect itself. And all of that is based on animal fat and protein. I mean, that's what your brain is. And it's really slightly disturbing still to think about, I might be a different person if I had done this even a little bit later in life. But I had immediately had all those problems that vegans have. So the depression, the anxiety, that just terrible kind of ennui, exhausted feeling in that fog in your brain. And you get used to it, because it doesn't come on the first day. It may take a few months, even a few years, depending on how good, your background nutrition has been for your life. And you don't realize that it's not normal. You just think, well, this is how life is. But I mean, to give you one example, this was a constant, for 20 years. If I couldn't find my house keys or my wallet, I would end up in a puddle on the floor, just crying. Like there's the level, there's no bounce in your brain. There's no give. Like the tiniest little thing happens and you have no resources left to use to just deal with something as silly as, I'm like, where did I put my damn keys? And it's that kind of thing. And then, those rages and you just fall off the cliff, just every day pretty much. I met a young guy much later who, had read my book and had been through very similar things. And so he was a vegan for 2 years. And by the end of it, he had OCD, he had suicidal depression, like just every horrible emotional problem that he had never had before. But he had moved to Portland, Oregon to, of course, be with the vegans. And he was working in a vegan bakery. And this is the point. Every day, starting at 2:00, vegans would come into this little bakery and buy they had these giant cookies that had 2 inches of icing on them. It was essentially pure sugar. And they would be desperate, of course, because their blood sugar has completely crashed. And they would be waiting in line to get this, this wad of sugar, essentially. And there was always at least one person crying. Wow. Sometimes somebody would be screaming. There was always, every single day, one person crying. And he would go home every night and say to his girlfriend, there's something wrong with us. Like, I know this isn't normal, but I can't quite figure out what has gone so wrong. Eventually he got out, but that was it. Like, that was my life. I completely understand now what happened to my brain. But at the time, you just don't know. And it just feels normal. And of course, when all your friends are doing it too, everybody just keeps saying, yeah, this is just life. And of course, when you're young, you really don't know better. It's not like I'd had 20 years of adulthood. And then when it starts to fall off the edge, you're like, yeah, this isn't right. I mean, I started as a teenager where you're already a little bit crazy. So yeah, the brain, my poor brain, I'm really sorry for it.
And then Big Pharma just keeps working off of the anxiety and depression and has endless supplies of different medications people can get themselves on, get further down the rabbit hole.
That's so crazy. Wow.
And there's so many. I mean, I think we all know people who, with better nutrition, they start to understand you need full fat animal products every day, a huge chunk of them. And it's amazing how even within a week or two, people feel dramatically better. And then in a month or two, they can start getting off some of those meds. And, it's like this little miracle that people can produce in their own lives just by eating grass-fed butter and some grass-fed beef. Like, it makes a huge difference.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. You said something really important in there that people it's not just this is what I eat. It's I am X. It's not just food. It couldn't just be food. This is my entire way of life. This is what I believe. This is my ideology. I'll do any mental gymnastics to keep the cognitive dissonance going. And And the hard, really tough thing is like, you're doing it for the very best of reasons, generally speaking. It comes from really great intentions. Like it's admirable.
Yeah. So the thing about being a vegan is it is never just a diet. It is almost entirely, it becomes your identity. So it's your whole sense of self is wrapped up in this. And the problem with embracing something that deeply is that when it comes time to deal with information that is perhaps new and different, that is in some way threatening to that ideology, you can't handle it. It's too terrifying. So this is again where you get into those sort of cult-like situations where you just cannot engage. And in my life, that really went on for 20 years because I never stopped being passionately interested in trying to figure out, like, why were humans destroying the planet? Where did this start? Why are we doing it? What is the mechanism? Like, what is that? Like, what's the progress of this? Like, what's the moment when humans decided to do this stuff? What is it called? How does it function? So I was like always engaged in this kind of research and doing my own experiments, like trying to grow food and all this. And I couldn't face the answers that I was finding because they ran completely counter to what I thought was true, speaking as a vegan. And so I mean, literally it was the angel I wrestled for 20 years.
Wow.
And one of the good things about finally having to give up, that whole way of life was that I could finally take a look at all that information that I had gathered, both, as I say, experientially, and then also, just all the books I'd been trying to read. And then I couldn't finish them because it was too disturbing. And like, I didn't know how to make it all come together. And finally, when I was able to just put down the vegan identity, it was like, okay, I actually do have some answers. I do actually know. I have managed to accumulate some information here and I need to put it together in a framework. And then I did that and life was better again. But I mean, it is a really hard year or two. Anybody who comes out of that world, you don't know what's stable. It's like the universe has collapsed around you. You don't know who you are. You don't know what your place is in the cosmos. You just have no idea what's right and what's wrong and what's up and what's down. And it's very, very hard. And if you've lost all your friends on top of it, it's a tough time. I mean, I answer these emails all the time, like almost every day, where it's some poor person who has crawled out half dead and then doesn't know what to do. And it's just heartbreaking.
That's so sad.
It is. Luckily, there's a much better world now that you can fall into that, people who understand ancestral nutrition, who have a bigger analysis about what agriculture is and what it's done to the planet and how whatever your values are about compassion and sustainability, that actually being a vegan is not the best way to institute those values. So we have a whole other world out here that's full and bountiful and loves animals and wants to repair the planet. And you can enter that world instead and you will be happier and healthier and actually do something good.
Yeah.
So that's the good part, but it's not an easy emotional experience for anybody. Nobody gives this up easily. Once you're in, you're in. You're committed.
So you, in your personal story, your journey as a vegan kind of comes to an end. What was that like? What things got kind of cleared up and fixed pretty quickly and what things linger on?
All right. Well, so the problems I got, immediately I had blood sugar issues. Of course, I didn't have a word for that. All I knew was that as time went on, I was increasingly hungry all the time, shaking, crying, that just incredible urge to eat that it's unbearable. Like until you put food in your mouth, you feel like you're dying. And that is true because your blood sugar is either too low or too high. And that's what happens when you eat a load of sugar 3, 4, 5 times a day. You're going to be on that roller coaster constantly. So that happened really quickly. And I didn't know what it was, but I remember the first few times it happened because I had never experienced that before. And I didn't have words for it. It was like, wow, I feel really sick and I'm shaking and I'm sweating. And I know if I eat, I'll feel better. And I don't know why. And I ate a vegan cookie, and I felt, of course, better, but that's the roller coaster right there. So that happened. I have 3 autoimmune diseases now. And the first one that I got was Hashimoto's, but it took probably 20 years for me to get a real diagnosis on that. So I was increasingly exhausted and did not know why. So the thyroid thing is really common among vegans. Wheat is very, very hard on the thyroid, and we know that soy kills it. So your basic vegan diet is probably going to give you thyroid problems, especially if you're a woman. So I got the Hashimoto's thing. So that happened. I also ended up with a condition called gastroparesis. My stomach does not make enough hydrochloric acid anymore. And I understand now what happened, but at the time I did not know what it was. All I knew was that I felt sick pretty much all the time. So this sort of semi-constant nausea. And it's because if you don't have enough hydrochloric acid, your stomach just can't really empty. So I lived with that for a good long time, like decades. That got a lot better once I had a diagnosis and was able to start taking betaine hydrochloride with meals, but I didn't know that. And again, that comes back to that blood sugar roller coaster, because when your insulin is too high, when your blood sugar is too high, your pancreas, it's an emergency. It's a biological emergency. And your pancreas will release this flood of insulin. It's a very blunt instrument. And this is one way you can see that we were not meant to eat a diet essentially of sugar, because we can't handle it. So you get this flood of insulin, and insulin grabs every single thing that it can that's floating around in your bloodstream and shoves it into your fat cells for storage as fast as it can. And this is so that your brain doesn't die, because we can only exist within a very narrow range of blood sugar. If it's too high or too low, you can fall into a coma and die. So it's an emergency. So insulin is the response, and it grabs everything into the cells for storage so that you don't die. But the problem, of course, is that it does too much. It doesn't know, like, there's no balance here. It doesn't know how to judge whether it's too much or too little. So what happens next is your blood sugar is too low. And that's when that crying, shaking, sweating, I'm going to die if I don't eat feeling washes over you. And compulsion doesn't even begin to describe it. Like, you've got to eat. So then you eat. And if you're a vegan, what you're eating, I don't care if it's quote a whole grain or a complex carbohydrate. If it makes you feel better to call it that, go ahead. You can eat that stuff. By the time it's done in your intestines, it has been broken down into simple sugars, because that's how the digestive tract works. So you've just eaten another load of sugar. Congratulations. So your blood sugar goes back up and you feel a little bit better, but guess what? Now it's too high again. In comes the insulin. Out goes everything. Now your blood sugar is too low, and you will go through that cycle repeatedly throughout the day as a vegan, over and over and over. It'll happen faster and faster because you're wearing out your insulin receptors. We really are not meant to absorb that level of sugar every day. So as the years go by, it was, by the time I was done, I was probably eating every half an hour, every 20 minutes. It's just semi-constant. I had to put a little piece of food in my mouth not to feel sick. And then you realize what you've done, and you stop. And it's this amazing 2 or 3 days where, for the first time in your life, you feel clear-headed, like, because you're not on that constant roller coaster. But one of the other substances that your body produces when you have that surge of insulin is adrenaline. And it's another way that your body is trying to keep you alive. So if we can shove all this sort of excess sugar into your muscles really quickly, maybe you'll burn it off, and then the brain won't die. And that's sort of the theory, I guess, that your body is going on. But all that adrenaline 3, 4, 5 times a day, it can't be done. You're going to wear out. Adrenal fatigue is coming. But the other thing that you wear out is your capacity to make digestive enzymes. Because what adrenaline does is it shuts down your digestive system. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, if a lion is coming at you and you need to run, what you want is all the energy to go to those big muscles so you can either do fight or flight. But what that means is we have to shut down digestion so that all the energy can go to your muscles. So immediately it shuts down your body's capacity to digest food. And sometimes if the fright is bad enough, we all know people can, you pee your pants, or, you have some kind of release there that's no fun for anyone, but that can happen under really high stress situations, soldiers, people in really life-threatening situations. And that's why your body is getting ready to run or fight, like dump everything you don't need. Now you're ready to go. And that's adrenaline. That's what it does. So you're instigating that in your own body over and over and over throughout the day when you eat those high carb diets. So you do that for 10, 20 years like I did, and you have permanently damaged your body's capacity to produce those digestive enzymes that you need, like the hydrochloric acid. I just can't make it anymore. So I have to take this other stuff, externally, but it really works. So, and it's better. It got better, but it took time. I'm nowhere near that was bad. So And that may take, I remember asking that particular doctor, well, how long am I going to have to take this? And he just laughed. He's like, you and betaine are going to be friends for a long time. I'm like, all right, well, luckily you don't need a prescription. Anybody can buy it. But if you are one of those people who's coming out of one of these kind of high carb diet situations and you find yourself being really nauseated all the time, that's the go-to. Try betaine hydrochloride. You can buy it like at any natural food store, they'll have it. It's over the counter, really easy supplement. You can't really hurt yourself with it. Just try it for a day or two. If you feel better, that's the issue. So I did that. I felt nauseated for, 25 years or something. And then as is very common with women on low-fat diets of any kind, I completely messed up my reproductive organs and my reproductive cycle. I almost never got a period that whole 20 years. No doctor could explain to me what had gone wrong. I ended up with really bad uterine fibroids, and I'm naming the soy. I can't prove it, obviously, but that's my guess because, of course, soy does that. So I had to have an operation to have the fibroids removed. But also the thing that was so striking to me was, after that whole 20 years of just being like, I don't know, I just don't seem to have very regular periods. I almost never get one. And then, I found all this information. I flipped my diet all around. It started to stabilize pretty quickly, but the real catch was when I took soy out of the diet, which I went cold turkey. Once I had read all that information about like how terrifying soy was, that this was a drug, not a food. You get that cold chill of horror, like, what have I done? And I went absolutely cold turkey. I'm never going to eat this again. I threw everything out. I'm not going to eat it. And about 2 weeks later, I got a period and literally didn't miss one again until I hit menopause. Wow. It was 28 days, like clockwork. You could have set the nuclear clock to it. It was that regular. Wow. This was after 20 years of just being completely random and bizarre. It was stunning. Even I was stunned. Just like that was so dramatic. Wow. And it was absolutely, the low fat helped, but the soy was the real kicker.
Don't eat soy. Do not eat soy.
Do not touch soy. Whatever else, people who are listening, whatever else you decide to do or not do with your life, do not eat soy. The number one thing is take the soy out of your diet. It is absolutely poison to animals. It's like none of us should be eating it. The same thing happens to farm animals. The same thing happens to dogs. Like, do not. It's just, we shouldn't be eating it. Just stop. It's just completely messes with you. Men and women, everybody, nobody needs those phytoestrogens. Do not do it. And the reason that soy makes phytoestrogens is exactly that reason. Plants fight back. They don't want to be eaten either. And so the way that they keep you from eating their babies is they wrap their seeds in all kinds of anti-nutrients and even toxic poisons. But for soy, it's been very clever throughout the millennia that it's existed. It said, fine, you can try to eat my babies, but I will make sure you don't reproduce.
Yep. Wow.
And so you eat soy, you're not going to get a baby. I could not have had a baby. There's nothing. And for my life, was not actually a tragedy because I had decided that I probably wasn't going to have children, and that's fine. But if I had wanted to have a baby, that would have been utter heartbreak. But that's why. And a lot of people who take up kind of the vegetarian worldview, and I did this myself, so I'm not saying this in an accusatory way. I'm just saying it as this was the worldview that I tried to adopt. And I struggled with it a lot because the idea was animals are worthy of moral consideration and they're sentient beings like us. And I want to care about what happens to them because they suffer. And I don't want there to be animal suffering, but we're still drawing a line. And the line is between animals and all the other living creatures. So all we've done is kind of shift that line one category down. But when you're a vegan, you still think that plants are just insensate salads and bacteria certainly don't get any notice. So everything that's keeping the soil alive, you don't even know the name for it. And literally the entire cycle of life depends on those creatures.
That's right.
And so none of that matters. What matters is the creatures who are like us in certain ways. And those ways are essentially, does it have a mother? Does it have a face? And I used to say that all the time. If it has a mother or a face, I'm not going to eat it. But everything else is fair game because they don't count. They're not conscious. They don't suffer. They don't feel. They don't communicate. They're just kind of there. And I struggled with that because a lot of times when you get into arguments with people who aren't vegan, they would bring that up, and it always felt like this sort of gotcha. But I didn't have an answer. They would say, ha ha, like, you think animals count. Well, what about plants? And it would really get my back up because I wanted to care about plants. As it turns out, I've actually had conversations with plants. Like, I know they're alive. And the more you learn about how plants communicate and care for each other and build communities, and how they fight for their lives, like, they are incredible chemical warfare experts. It's because they can't run. What they do instead is chemical messages. It's how they talk to each other. And then they are able to fight off all kinds of attacks from animals by using various toxic chemicals. I mean, that's what tobacco does. That's like what soy does. They have all kinds of ways to do that. And then just learning about, like, right now I live in the redwoods, and the shape of redwood needles is perfectly designed, by evolution over time. There's a lot of fog here on the California coast, and redwood trees are really good at turning fog into actual water. So they capture the fog with the shape of their needles, and then it comes down as little drops of water every single morning as the fog rolls in off the ocean. I know, it's beautiful. But even more, the water that they use, they only use about 1/3 of the water that they collect. The other 2/3 is for all the other plants. So nature loves the community, and there's not a single creature that you could find and discuss that wouldn't have some feature like that, where they are taking care of each other, because that's what life is literally a web of creatures helping each other. And that also involves eating each other. It means we are feeding each other. This is what I tried to get out of as a vegan, and you can't get out of it. Every single thing you eat was alive once. It loved its life. It communicated with its friends. It had a family, all of it. And plants, animals, bacteria, whatever level of the trophic purity you want to look at, all of them are alive. All of them deserve some kind of moral quantification. Like, they all matter. And in fact, the little tiny ones that we can't see are really the ones that are necessary. We are not. We can't have a planet without them. So all of that was just like, it was really hard for me as a vegan to handle it. And then, again, when I came out, I was finally able to say, oh, thank God, plants matter too. I love plants. I know they're alive. And then the more I understood about plant sentience, I mean, you just have to be in awe about the things they know and the things they do and how much they communicate and how they build forests and how they build prairies and how the first ones call the other ones to them. Like, they literally call seeds to them. We don't know how it happens, but they do it. So they're extraordinary. So, and there are people who now call themselves things like plant neurobiologists because they're able to study how plants think and how plants respond and how plants communicate. They are just as sentient as you and I. And so I'm very, very grateful that I don't have to draw that line anymore and sort of live this contradiction where I can just say all of life, it's all of us. We all matter. We're all here. We're all in it together. And that includes plants. But anyway, plants fight back. So you're going to wreck yourself if you eat too many of them because they know that you're coming for them and they have defenses. So another problem is, so especially when you're eating like whole grains and whole beans, a lot of plants have anti-nutrients. So for instance, we mentioned the phytoestrogens, but soy and other grains also have what are called phytates or phytic acid. And these are enzymes that in animal digestive tracts, they will block the absorption of minerals. So if you're eating whole grains and think you're doing a good thing, you're actually not. You're making your bones and your teeth weaker every time you eat. And so, as a vegan, I was only eating whole grains and whole beans, and I destroyed my spine. I have really severe degenerative disc disease in my lumbar spine, and that started about 2 years into being a vegan. So I was 18 years old, and my spine was coming to pieces, and nobody knew why. Of course, the doctors aren't trained in nutrition, so nobody even knew to ask me. But in the aftermath to all of this, when I tried to figure out, okay, how did this all go so wrong? Stumbling upon all of this other information that I never looked at as a vegan, it became quite clear what I had done. So in order to absorb minerals, you have to have enough good quality fat in your diet because that's how mineral digestion works in human bodies. So right away, without the fat, I wasn't going to absorb. But the second problem, of course, is that what I was eating was completely blocking any minerals that I was managing to get because of the phytates. So every time I ate whole wheat and whole brown rice and thought I was doing the right thing, I was just making it worse.
Lierre is the best in the business at being able to explain the science behind things while interlacing it with a story, in that case, her own personal story of using a vegetarian and vegan diet for over 2 decades and everything that went wrong with her health. Not only was she able to explain what happened to her, but she's able to explain what is going on in the body and the science behind it. We absolutely love that. If you haven't already, go check out The Vegetarian Myth. Her book is absolutely amazing. You can listen to it or read it. I've done both, and it was absolutely life-changing to hear that message and to hear her explain why the plant-based message and plant-based diet is not best for us or the planet, or is not even best ethically. Really interesting stuff there. We have one more story that we are going to listen to, and that last story to wrap up this ketogenic series is my own personal story. So we're going to go to an episode that I did with Dr. Sarah Zaldivar. She posted this episode on her channel on YouTube. So there was no audio content that lived in podcast land. So what I did is I just took it and made it into an audio podcast, put it on Boundless Body Radio on episode 313, and so that people could listen to it or watch it if they wanted. As I have been getting more and more involved in this space, in the ketogenic world, I've been putting out the podcast and really working hard to get this message out. I'm starting to realize that I have a unique perspective that not a lot of other people have when we're talking about how people came to find low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets. Recently, one of my clients was reaching out to ask if I had any specific episodes about people who are measuring metabolism and what would happen to the metabolism when people started eating low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets. And I was scrolling through all of the different episodes, and it took me a little while before I realized, like, wait, the best person to tell this story and to help share information about this is actually me. I don't know a lot of people in this space that had the ability to experience what I experienced, actually working on a metabolic cart for the better part of 15 years to measure metabolism, and seeing what was going on with that was really life-changing, and it's what really started my obsession into low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets. It's just a different perspective. It's an interesting way to get involved in all of this, and so enjoy my story of how I found ketogenic and low carbohydrate diets. But I went to school to study architecture. I thought I wanted to be an architect. So I was doing that in school, but at the time I also joined a big box gym, basically to train for the off season of cycling. And as I was in that big box gym, I started watching some of the personal trainers and thought, like, wow, this is really fun. These guys look like they're having a really good time. They're working with people one-on-one. They're showing them the right exercises. They were also using heart rate monitors at the time, which was something that I had been using for several years. And I saw that that was a tool that they were using. So I decided, this looks great. Let me see what I need to do to be a personal trainer. So I walked into the manager's office. He showed me what certification to get online. And so I did that. And a few months later, I got hired on as a personal trainer with 0 experience. And that was the end of architecture. I never went back to school for any of that. And I got to kind of train my people. So that was really fun. And that was back in 2007 when I first started. So back then, we didn't really have a huge focus on nutrition. Everybody knew how to kind of eat well, which was you eat lots of vegetables, you have lots of whole grains, keep your proteins lean. So a lot of the trainers were eating every 2 to 3 hours, lots of salads and chicken. And that was all just fine back then. A lot of the nutrition I had been exposed to is more from like the bodybuilding world. And so lots of brown rice, lots of broccoli, again, chicken breasts and things like that. And when classic stuff that we've all eaten way too much of. And anyway, through my career, I eventually got trained to work on metabolic carts. And so these are the machines and equipment that basically we can hook up to people. Basically, we attach a mask that's collecting their respirations. And the respirations could tell us all kinds of different information about the calories they were burning. It could tell us about where the calories were coming from, whether they were burning more fat or carbohydrates. Most people would recognize like a VO2 max test where they know how much they can breathe at their maximum, where their heart rate zones are. We could also use resting metabolic tests. So how many calories do you burn just to be yourself and sit in a chair? And so we were using that information to help give people training programs and heart rate zones. And, back then we would look at metabolism exactly the way that most people see metabolism, calories in, calories out. So you come in, you do a test with me, we measure, and we find out that you burn 1,500 calories a day just being you, not doing anything other than sitting in a chair. And, you have your job, and that's going to burn another 400 calories. And then if you work out on top of that, that's going to burn another few hundred calories. And so most people, obviously coming to us for weight loss, we would use those numbers and say, okay, you burn a total of 2,300 calories a day. So let's have you eat eat 500 calories less every single day. So let's have you eat 1,800 calories. And by the math, 500 calories multiplied by 7 days is 3,500, which is 1 pound of fat. And so we would say, okay, by the end of this week 1, you should lose 1 pound. And by week 2, you should lose 2 pounds. And by week 3, it's your total of 3 pounds, and so on and so forth. But it never worked that way. Like everybody we ever put through that, they would lose a lot of weight in the beginning, but then the weight loss would slow down. We would notice that our people would become a little bit more tired, a little cranky. They would have less and less willpower. They'd be super motivated in January, but as the weeks wore on and the weight loss is stalling, and now they're feeling terrible, have, cravings for things, their energy's in the toilet, it's way more tempting to binge on, 10 donuts in the break room or whatever. And so as many people as we put through those protocols, we just noticed that things were not really working very well in the way that we, were telling people they should work. And then as trainers, we would just turn around and, do the Jason Fung thing, blame the victim. We're going to blame you for not following our advice. I told you to do that 500 calorie run on the treadmill and eat 500 calories less, and you can't do it. Well, you suck. Like, you need better willpower. You need to stick with it. This is why you've gained so much weight.
Did you say the Jason Fung thing?
Yeah, so Dr. Jason Fung talks about this all the time in the obesity code, and he calls it blaming the victim. And it's like, we don't ever...
I know that he's not blaming the victim, so we just want to let everybody know.
Yeah.
Dr. Jason Fung is a good resource.
Absolutely. Yeah, good clarification.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it was several years of doing that and not having our clients get very good results was just kind of frustrating, but it was what it was. We didn't know any other way. And it was in 2012, our company did a call with a contractor who's doing the same kind of testing that we were doing. And he was working with endurance athletes, which I was a cyclist. So I was interested in endurance, but in this call, he was describing how he could change people's metabolism, especially while they exercise, by changing the diet. And this is mind-blowing to me at the time. I had no idea you could do that, and you could improve somebody's fat burning, for example, which would then make an endurance athlete be able to last much longer. You have a very limited storage of sugar in the body, and that runs out, and most endurance athletes know that you bonk. You run out of energy all of a sudden. And so this guy was saying that he was feeding his athletes high-fat things that I thought were, completely off the table for what you should be eating. So heavy cream and butter and bacon. And he's describing these top level, like professional triathletes competing at the highest levels, only taking in, less than 60 or 70 calories on the bike every single hour, which was complete opposite of everything that we'd been told at the time. You had to eat lots of sugar while you were biking, or again, you'd run out of energy. So that was the first time that it was ever introduced to me that nutrition could make a difference in metabolism and metabolic rate. The next stage, I remember we acquired 2 new trainers who started saying that eat fat to get fit. It was like, what are you talking about? Eat fat to get fit. That's not a thing. And they talked about healthy fat. Like, what the hell is health? There's no healthy fat. Like, all fat is bad, of course. And so, we started putting olive oil on things and had avocados every now and again, and energy was better. And so that started to kind of open up different possibilities of how nutrition really could affect people. I came across Nina Teichel's book, The Big Fat Surprise, and how influential that was in my career. And really all of this to say, like, what we were doing, what we were told to do was not working. Just flat wasn't working. People couldn't do it. And if they did, it didn't produce the result that we wanted it to. So everybody quit. And so we started to find this other thing that nobody was talking about, and it started to work for people. And that's kind of how I got introduced into, okay, maybe fat is okay in the diet and can actually help people.
Wonderful. And it's so great to hear that. And I think also you didn't go through like the whole nutrition brainwashing thing. Like, cause I feel for me, it took me like way too long to come around, and I kept just applying it to myself, and it just would not work. And it was like I mentioned on the podcast where you had me on, I was talking about just how difficult it was for me to finally understand that everything that I was taught was wrong. So I'm so glad. I know it still was a process for you because you still were taught the opposite things, but at least, you were applying it at maybe a faster rate with a lot more clients as opposed to like just on you. And you could see that simply wasn't working for pretty much most people. So yeah, I'm so glad to hear that more and more people in this field are realizing and seeing through all the BS and all of the misinformation that we've been given. I mean, we can dive into why all of this is happening, and I have my thoughts on it, but I want to continue on with your background and try to see, did you apply this to yourself? Like, what was your personal experience with that?
Yeah, definitely. And you bring up such a good point when you're talking about like learning this one way. And I was fortunate enough not to have to go through the medical system in that way, because you have to undo, but you're sitting there thinking like, how I must be wrong. That there's no way that all of the nutrition guidelines, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, every nutrition book I've ever read, there's no way that all of them could be wrong about this. It blows your mind. It's so crazy. So part of what we had to do with the company that we were with was we would have to do weight loss challenges. So the company started offering 2 times a year. They would do, it was called the 90-day challenge. It was a 3-month weight loss contest. And as personal trainers, you've worked as a trainer before. It's you're on the grind. It's 100% commission. It's a lot of work, a lot of sales. And as trainers, we were, we had numbers we were expected to hit, and we had to fill people up to do these contests with us and buy our services. And the company figured out really quickly that if people signed up for these programs, they would make a lot of money. So it wasn't very long before they said, well, we're doing 90-day contests twice a year. Why don't we do 60-day contests and do them 4 times a year? And sure enough, they made a lot of money doing that. And so as trainers, we'd be responsible to sign people up, do a consultation with them, weigh them in the first time. We would give them, the company's packet of, 100 different recipes and exotic shopping lists with ingredients you've never heard of before, and all the meal plans and preps, and here's your instructions, and here's all these events that you're going to do. And it just, again, the compliance on a program like that was so low. We would calculate it, and it would be like in the teens. Like 15% of the people who started the contest would actually show up at the very end of the contest to weigh out. And all the while, it was very low. It was somewhere in the teens. 15 is an estimate, but yeah, it was literally not very low,
Yeah.
not more than 20%. And I'm talking successfully or unsuccessfully, just looking at if I weighed you in at the start, did you even show up to weigh out at the very end, whether you lost or gained or whatever. So again, as a trainer, you're frustrated because, these people aren't getting good results. They're dropping off, they're quitting early. But the other frustrating thing, just from a numbers standpoint and a business standpoint, is, a month later, a new contest is starting. We have to find a whole new cohort of people to do them. And if all these people weren't successful the first time, they're not going to sign up again and again and again. So it was just hard. It was hard to pitch these programs to people. And, you always had another one coming, and it was always going to fail. And I remember very specifically, I sat down with a guy. He was an employee. He was kind of forced to do the program anyway. And I'm listening to the things that he's eating, and he's, waking up in the middle of the night eating cereal, and he's on a lot of the carbohydrates and whole grains and whatever. And I'm just listening to it, and I'm thinking like, okay, wow, you have mentioned no fat. You're trying to lose like 25 pounds. So I just said, like, look, let's see if we can get a little bit more fat in your diet and see how this goes. And I'll never forget. He came back to me a day and a half later. He says, dude, I've already lost 2 pounds. What the hell is this keto thing? And I'm like, that's great. First of all. Second of all, I've heard of it, but I really don't know enough about this. So let me find out and I'll tell you. And sure enough, that's where we really deep dove into the low carbohydrate space. That was 2018. I want to say that we really got into that and started realizing like carbohydrates were not essential in the diet. This guy won the contest. And so we got recognized for that. He got recognized for that. He ended up getting really close to his goal weight. So in 60 days, he lost like 25 pounds. We were using body fat scales. And so that was the other surprising thing, is like we were validating that people were losing fat. They weren't just losing weight, they were losing fat. And just so
like on a BIA machine, like an InBody.
Exactly.
Okay.
It was the InBody 570. Yeah. Bioelectrical impedance. And so it can measure, skeletal muscle mass or fat mass. And people weren't losing, lean mass. They weren't losing water weight. They were losing a lot of fat. And so we finished that contest and like really stoked. This guy got really good results. And my wife and I were sitting around and, preparing for the next one and just kind of talking like this sucks. Like we have to go find new people. Like, what are we going to do? We have to run this stupid program. And we kind of had this idea, like, what if we do our own thing? What if we sign people up for this, but rather than mess with all the other things that the company was doing, why don't we find other meal plans and give them to them? And why don't we do some seminars and we can bring people in and talk to them about this in the very beginning, and then maybe have other seminars where we talk about, if you're stalling, these are some things you can do, and maybe some things that you can do when you weigh out. And so we just started running our own program, and everybody who signed up with us knew that they were doing this rogue thing that nobody was talking about. We could fly under the radar. The company didn't know. And we got people really great results. We had the advantage of using that scale to measure weight and body fat percentage. And, this isn't a random controlled trial, but we have data from all those people who did the contest. And it was like more than 60% of the people who started actually finished. So the compliance was way better. We tracked over, I want to say it was over like 160 or 180 people. And we found that of those people, the 68% or whatever it was that finished, it was like 121 people. They lost a combined 98% of all their weight came from fat.
Wow.
It's mind-blowing. I never thought you could do that. And any textbook that I have for nutrition or personal training, there's nothing that says that you can do that. And again, this isn't a randomized controlled trial, but this is a pretty large sample of people, men and women, young and old. Some people wanted to lose 200 pounds. Other people wanted to gain 10 pounds of muscle. Like, it was all across the board. And we had, very simple meal plans that we gave to people, and really, pretty low level of educational resources besides, just the low carbohydrate space, and people got tremendous results. And so for me, that was it. That was what I was going to do. And that was my entire career at that point.
And that flipped the switch for you because you saw real results, and you saw like it was the exact same kind of challenge. And the only thing that differed was the type of food that you were recommending to your clients.
Yep.
Amazing.
It was really amazing. So I hope you have enjoyed this, the final episode of the Ketogenic series on the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. I really hope you've taken a lot away from this. Some of the key points that I would like to reiterate would be to understand that a ketogenic diet is our natural and normal state. Just because it has been presented as an iteration for a diet in the last few years does not make it a fad. When you understand the body and how the body works and how the body burns calories, you should very quickly understand that this is the way the body is supposed to run. It makes the most sense logically, anatomically, it makes the most sense evolutionarily, and it makes the most sense when the rubber meets the road. When I'm working with clients who are frustrated and are hungry all the time and are trying to follow the latest diet and follow the guidelines and try to eat more grains and fruits and vegetables and think that they're doing themselves a favor, and then they fail and think they're a total failure, and they blame themselves and think they don't have willpower, and that's just not true. If you are using a well-formulated ketogenic diet, you should learn very quickly that you feel great. You don't feel hungry. You have boundless amounts of energy and motivation. You might even notice that your sleep is better or more efficient. I notice all the time people tell me that in 6 hours they feel like they get a full night's sleep, where they were feeling like they were sleeping terribly for 9 hours. All of those things really improve on a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. It was cool to hear from all of the people that we heard from, not only the medical professionals, but also the citizen scientists from this episode, the people that took their health into their own hands and wanted to try something because what they were doing was not working. I hope you take that spirit of their stories into your own personal story and find ways to get more low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets into your life, and so you notice their benefit. So thank you again so very much for listening to this episode of the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. Thank you so very much for listening to this special episode taken from the Boundless Body Radio Premium Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow our show on Apple Podcasts and be sure to leave us a rating and review on that platform, as it is the best way to continue to get our message out to new people all over the world. And as we said in the introduction, feel free to book a 30-minute complimentary session with us on our website at myboundlessbody.com so we can discuss your health and fitness goals and help you come up with a plan. Thank you so very much, as always, for listening to Boundless Body Radio.